Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. An original adaptation written and read for you by Jon Buckeridge. Part 23. The Goddess. Gawain turned slowly to face the new arrival at the Great Green Chapel. Even as he did, he knew he recognized that voice, but it came from a figure he did not recognize. Standing in front of him was a tall, proud, stunningly beautiful woman. Slender and willowy, but radiating a sense of iron-hard strength, she had smooth, milky skin, clad in a dark robe, which seemed to cling to her figure like poured honey as she strode forward. As she moved, he realized her dress was not pure black as he had thought, but contained shades of deep blue, green, and purple within its darkness. One thing that was pure black, though, was her eyes. Those beetle-black eyes that had scared him so much. "Mallory?" he asked in bewilderment, for indeed those eyes were hers. The long white hair was hers as well, though now it was far from lank and lifeless, flowing lustrously behind her. No, this was not Mallory, but it was certainly the soul behind the shrunken figure. And then he understood, and he addressed her by her true name. Morgan. "Hello, nephew," replied the witch, "and to think I was worried you wouldn't recognize me." She stretched luxuriously, arching her back like a cat. "I must say it's a true joy to walk in this form after weeks as a hunched old crone." She shot Gawain a conspiratorial glance. "It's murder on the back, you know." She turned to face the green man, still standing calmly at the edge of the circle of trees. "So you let him live, Dungarith. Do you mind if I ask why?"
"He has bettered himself," the huge figure replied. "In the course of a year he has grown to be more than he was, and he has come to understand something of his place within creation."
"How curious," replied Morgan. "I would have thought he would fail this test spectacularly."
"Did you wish him to die at my hand?" asked the Green Knight. "Is he not your kin?"
"Oh, that?" she asked, letting out a silvery chuckle. "We're really not that close. Last time I saw him I tried to kill him myself." She glanced at Gawain again, fixing him with a sphinx-like stare. "Sorry about that. Glad to see you made it." "You wore a different face then," said Gawain. He wasn't quite sure why he was saying it, but he was aware he hadn't said anything in quite a while, and he disliked being talked about as if he was not there. Morgan gave the statement the response it perhaps warranted, and looked at him like she might a 5-year-old. "Boy, I change faces like you change shirts. Now do be quiet, the grown-ups are talking." She turned back to the Green Knight, but Gawain was not content to sit in silence while they discussed him like a horse at a market. "If I am so immaterial, then why go to all this trouble to test me? Why concoct all of this?" He struggled to think of the words to describe it, his hand clutching fruitlessly at the air. "This trickery, if I am so undeserving of your attentions." Once again Morgan turned her onyx eyes upon him, and once again she let loose a silvery laugh. "Oh, child, you do not think this was all for you, do you?" She stared at him, seemingly incredulous. "Do you really have such a high opinion of yourself? Well, no, I'm sorry to disappoint you. When I set these wheels in motion, I was hunting for far larger game than you." Gawain suddenly felt very small and very stupid. He had thought himself the centre of some great mystery, and that the weight of the world was conspiring to crush him for a full year now. To find out that he had stumbled into this, like some drunk falling into a ditch, rather took the wind out of his sails. Of course it was aimed at someone bigger. Who would go after the least of Arthur's knights when there were men whose names were literally legend? And suddenly it was all too clear who Morgan had been aiming at, and she had almost had him too until Gawain had taken the axe from his hand. "Arthur," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "Arthur," Morgan confirmed. "I orchestrated all of this and sent my friend Jack in the Green here in an effort to test my bloated blowhard of a brother, and you blundered into it like a priest in a whorehouse." "But why challenge Arthur like this?" Gawain asked. "He would never have fallen for tests such as these." Morgan raised an eyebrow and gave him yet another look of patronizing sympathy. Gawain was getting rather tired of those. "Oh, would he not?" she asked. You have a lot left to learn about your much-vaunted uncle, child. He may seem holier than thou, but believe me, he has an eye for the ladies that could make a pimp blush. You mark my words, one glance at Lady Bertilac in that gossamer gown of hers, and he'd have her flat on her back and thinking of England." Gawain was taken aback by that, and was completely lost for words, but Morgan went on. "But no, you had to step forward, all fire and fury and hunger to prove yourself, and take the axe from him." She was in full flow now, and clearly draining a well of pent-up frustration. "So I made the best of a bad bunch. If Arthur himself would not be the subject of my test, then at least his brave, bold, bonny knight could fail the test spectacularly, and prove his pompous round table to be as worthless as it seems. But now I find you passed. Despite it all, despite the strain and the pain and the attacks and the anguish, you passed." She laughed incredulously. I even tried to scare you off on the road. Tell me, Gawain, what sort of idiot decides that facing a pack of direwolves is a strong career path?" Gawain did not know what to say. It had just seemed like the right thing to do at the time. "And who does not slink on home rather than facing a troll?" she continued. Again, it had never really occurred to Gawain that turning tail was even an option. "I thought the dragon might finally have scared you off, but either you're a special kind of stupid, or I am for thinking it." And suddenly it was clear. The hooded figure on the road had a face after all. "It was you?" he asked. "It was all you?" "Yes, it was me!" she snapped, unleashing her anger at last. "What, did you think you were just some magnet for mystical creatures? Don't give yourself airs, boy." She paused for a moment, taking the time to steady her heaving breath. When she continued, it was with icy calm. "And now I find that not only did you not have the good grace to die on the journey, but you actually managed to pass the test, and my leafy friend here tells me you have become a better man, for whatever that phrase is worth." She stopped suddenly, and Gawain was quite convinced that her icy cold tone was far more frightening than the anger she had shown before. She stalked towards him, a leonine look in her cold dark eyes, and Gawain felt afraid, deeply afraid in the pit of his stomach. "Fortunately," she spat, stepping towards him, "there is no need for anyone to hear the sweet song of Gawain of the Green Axe if he does not return to tell his tale." She raised her hand, and Gawain's fear turned to terror. His own hand went to his waist to draw his sword, and Morgan laughed. "Don't even bother, boy. Trust me when I say you are fighting outside your weight class." The hand she raised seemed to suck in light. Gawain had expected it to glow with some magical energy, but instead it seemed to draw in all the light around it, and swallow it up until Morgan's arm was cloaked in darkness. Deep, terrifying darkness. Gawain knew that this was it. His time had come at last. He'd had a brief reprise from the headsman's axe, but this was a blow that would surely hit home. And then it didn't. Morgan stopped, her shadowed arm a handspan from his chest, and looked behind her at her own leg. Gawain followed her glare and saw that her leg was encased in long vines sprouting out of the earth directly beneath her foot. They were thick and strong and snaked about her leg all the way up to her hips. Morgan let out a snarl of frustration, casting a murderous glance at the Green Knight still standing sentinel at the edge of the ring of trees. She drew back her shadow-clad arm as if to hurl something at Gawain, and in an instant the limb was encased as well. It was so fast that Gawain had barely seen it happen, but a trailing tendril had erupted from the ground and pulled Morgan's arm back down by her side. Gawain realized, in a sudden, shocking moment of clarity, that the Green Knight had never needed the axe. That was nothing more than a formality, some part of the game they were playing. If he had wanted to, the giant could have killed Gawain with a thought. Held captive by those powers, Morgan glared back at the Green Knight with fiery fury in her gaze. "How dare you!" she gasped, her voice filled with affront and outrage.
"He passed the test, lady," the Green Man replied. "He has won the game. You may not strike him down just because you expected him to lose."
"I am a goddess," she hissed at the figure.
"Goddess you may be," the Green Knight replied, "but might I remind you that you are a guest in my home?"
He did not step forward, and nor did he lean, but somehow, while remaining perfectly still, he seemed to loom over her.
"Do you really want to test yourself against me, here, in the very seat of my power?"
There was a long silence. Obsidian eyes met Emerald, and Gawain could swear he felt a flash of fire between them. Finally, Morgan relented. The tension drained from her body and left her limp. "Go," she said to Gawain, and he went. He did not need to be told twice. He simply scrabbled around, grabbing hold of his discarded items, and set off sprinting from the Green Chapel as fast as his legs would carry him. Down the darkened corridor he ran, bursting through the arched doorway and into the gloom of the deep forest. He was relieved to see that Gringolet was still there waiting, but frankly, if he had not been, then Gawain was fully prepared to run all the way back to Camelot and not stop until he got there. Climbing into the saddle of his faithful friend, he set off at a gallop, putting the Green Chapel and its terrifying occupants behind him. "That was the most terrifying moment," said his inner voice. "And you fought a dragon?" Digging his heels into Gringolet's flanks, he urged the horse a little faster. He did not still want to be there if either one of them changed their mind. Thank you for listening. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is a Settle Stories commission. Written and read for you by Jon Buckeridge. Story consultant was Miriam Sarin. Music was Tectonic by Saedra, downloaded via Uppbeat. It was a Parable Arts production.